The following is a transcript between Matías De Stefano, referred to as me, and his higher self, referred to as I am, originally produced on November 6, 2020, under the constellation of Scorpio in the mental week, examining through the solar plexus chakra. Me, speaking of the importance of going inward, when I immerse myself in myself, I find only a great emotion that encompasses my entire inner being, perhaps the one that most defines my inner world, enveloping my essence, and that is anguish. Defining what it feels like is strange because it comes from many emotions which I cannot relate to each other. Sometimes it invades my whole being, making me fall into a crushing depression that can last for a day or a week. I am. What do you feel during this time? Me. As if I'm out of breath. I cannot move my body and everything loses meaning. It gets cloudy, nothing's clear. It's like looking outside without seeing what is there, with a lost gaze. Desire is lost in every way, and sensation is like plunging into the pain without logic, without reason. Sometimes I try to understand that origin, and yet there isn't. What is anguish? I am. First of all, anguish comes from the Indo-European word ang, which means tight. Etymologically, it describes the fact that more than one thing is tied and pressed against the others, becoming controlled and narrow. Imagine then sadness, melancholy, anger, rage, love, euphoria, pleasure, joy, all of them moving through your body, being trapped and tied as a bow, and then pressed against each other. Neither can move, they just remain still and static. If the energy does not move, everything that used to move you ends in silence, generating a feeling of existential emptiness because existence is movement. Thus, anguish surrounds essence, as it is the last negative emotion that you will find on the brink of neutrality. Me. In other words, anguish, like melancholy and sadness, does not have a reason for being. It does not have an object of reference, but rather it is a sensation that occurs when all of the others join the limit of existence to return to the center. This explains why people experience an anguished nonsense that we cannot relate to anything when we approach the truth of our being. It's like nothing makes sense, not love, not fighting, not purpose, not sharing, nothing. Everything becomes irrelevant, and in a second you feel all of the emotions of your life without leaving one out, but they all have the same color and the same aroma, and that is anguish. I am. Do you know the astronaut syndrome? Me. Which one? I am. Solipsism. It comes from the Latin solus, to be alone, and ipsis, oneself. The syndrome speaks of a person who distances himself from much of reality in which he lives, that he tends to believe that nothing else exists but himself, that everything is a dream, and that everything that he sees only exists in the mind. Astronauts, cosmonauts, they are the ones who most present this psychological pathology because seeing the earth from the outside and being able to fill the empty space around them and living the experience that all things that they know are the only in a small sphere that leads for the person to consider that perhaps nothing exists, that everything is a dream, because where he lives there is no time or space. This warps the person in an anguished depression of unmanageable loneliness, which distance him from other individuals, from normal life on earth, making him lonely and hermits. Me. It sounds to me like we're talking about going inward to the mind, which is only one. I am, exactly. Solipsism is experienced by those who go very far into space, or by those who go very close inside the soul, as above, so below. The law of correspondence will remind us that going to the moon or Mars brings us the same sensation as going to our heart. For in both directions we approach totality, where time and space lose their meaning, and therefore everything that inhabits them will also lose you. Me. So there is no logic, because you enter the illogical. There is no point of reference anymore. There is only me and my perception of things. I am. Anguish is the last emotion that is felt from the human world when touching the great black hole of the essence of the I am. Me. But when we say that something causes us anguish, like seeing hunger in the world or a war, or something that causes disgust, people use anguish to refer to an infinite state of discomfort and sadness. I am. That's something else. That's not anguish. Anguish is like this thin layer that separates the spiraling chaos of the hurricane from the peaceful stillness of the eye of the storm. Anguish has no direction, no purpose, no logic. It is not an object on which to project yourself. A war does not produce anguish. Anguish can only be experienced by those who have survived the war, who no longer think about the war, cannot look at the future or the past, who cannot perceive a specific emotion since they all have lost all of them. Who watches a war or something disgusting only feels aversion, sadness, anger, discomfort, but not anguish. Anguish does not have a focus of attention. Me. And how would you define the anguish caused by remembering the past? I am. Melancholy. From Greek melos, black, and kolos, bile. It represents that visceral emotion that makes you see everything black, that prevents you from seeing ahead. You can only feel inside. Melancholy is related to the emotions linked to the ancestral and visceral, to the links that still weigh because you have not been able to get rid of them. So they return in a form of vomit, something unprocessed or untranscended. Me. In 2010, it was the first time that I came to Egypt. I needed to be here. I wanted it with all of my might. My guides warned me not to come, saying that I was not prepared to face the current reality. But I didn't follow his advice, and I came. I cried every day, and it was one of the worst trips of my life. I had fever, diarrhea, vomiting. Every place I went to awoke in pain in me and memories. I thought that the past gave so much anguish, and now I understand that it was not, that it was melancholy and sadness. For years, because of my memories, I felt that the emotions in me and the idea of the past time was better. I could realize that I could not digest my current reality. I couldn't process in my stomach what I saw with my eyes today, because what I experienced no longer existed. Melancholy made me sick from a very young age, leading me to constant emotional depression. Each person that I remembered, each country that I felt, all had something that I had not finished digesting. Black bile. But every so often, when I would connect with the universe, with interdimensional memory, the emotion was different, and there was nothing. There were no sensations. There was no one to cry for. I tried to search in other dimensions for the same thing that I could feel here, longing for someone, loving someone that I had to leave, feeling anger at some enemy from another dimension, or attaching to some entity. And yet, the closer I got to the memory of the cosmos, I felt fewer emotions, fewer beings existed there to be longed for. There was no attachment, there was no emotion, and the feeling ceased to be melancholy because there was nothing to process. Faces, kisses, caresses, laughter, nothing. I only felt pulses, and they all led me. I am the anguish. Me, the anguish. There it was, the moment that I remembered that I was everything and that everything was me. I am who I am, he said. I told myself, and it resonated in the universal mind, and I felt very alone. I am. Solipsism. Me. Without feeling any emotion, I could perceive that there was nothing more than me and my thoughts, and I could feel that the moment of the great universal oxymoron, the full void, where everything is one and one is millions. And there I felt the greatest anguish of all, knowing that I was everyone and that nothing else existed. Suddenly, I even felt fear, but immediately vanished in the centrifugal force of anguish. Nothing made sense because my mind had given it to him. I am. The universe is a polarity that does not arise from two aspects, but from oneself. As you have rightly said, the universe is an oxymoron, born from the Greek word oxys, sharp, and moron, blunt, therefore an absurd concept that in itself contains dualities, defending silent, eternal instant, which reminds you of the feeling of Ouroboros, something without purpose, without end, in which its very duality is a mere perspective from the unit. If emotions are pulses of positive and negative energy that move the pendulum in the polarized cosmos, then the way to reach the center in the unity of things is only through the emotion without purpose. What is the quintessential universal oxymoron? Me. A distressing love. I am. When the universe expands, you can only feel love, because love is the emotion that connects everything and manifests creation toward the external and the positive. But when the separate creation seeks to return to the center, unifying things, it goes the other way, toward the integration of the expanded, seeking the interior of the forms of a negative. Thus, depressive anxiety will find a center. Me. So the anguish felt on the spiritual path is a way of knowing that we are unifying all things to find the center of the cosmos, right? I am. And in that instant, you see the eye of the hurricane, peace, plenitude, harmony, and love. The culmination of anguish is that instant in which you recognize if nothing makes sense, then I have to give it meaning. Then the only solution is for me to give it new meaning again, me, and to become the creator. I am. As in vibration waves, for a wave to advance and expand, it needs movement of low and high frequency in which the waves contract or distract, creating curves and valleys and hills that you call concave and convex positions. The concave position of a wave, the hill upwards, implies a positive point of expansion, while the convex position, the valley and downwards, implies a negative depression. The moment of the light at the high speed is due precisely to this position. If you want to propel the light down a straight cable, you will need a large initial push force to get it into the other end. Otherwise, it will lose momentum and stopping halfway. But in a spiral cable, the light, its particles, will pick up momentum in new descent, propelling themselves to the next one, increasing its strength instead of losing it. He now thinks, therefore, that depression has an overwhelming logic to help the expansion of light. Me. Sure, in other words, every process of internal crisis, of dark night of the soul, of anguish, is nothing more than a convex curve of the universe pushing itself to create. That is why many artists are depressive, because that's the way that they manage to find more wealth in the inner world. I am. In a world of external productivity, factories, fields, hard work, depression, anguish, and sadness are seen as weaknesses, a useless loss of strength for work. Thus, this has classified them as mental pathologies and has made everyone try to avoid them. Fear of these emotions appears, and this wears a person out. Who does not desire to live in his inner world in depression cannot find truth within him. The fear of falling into that uselessness has turned the process into something lasting and meaningless, a trap for the mind. But if you know what it exists for, then it becomes useful. Me. Well, anguish is the other face of love, two emotions that make up unique force of creation, the full void. I am. The next time you see anguish surround you, do not escape from it. Just remember that it is the strange sensation that occurs in your organs when the descent of a roller coaster approaches. But you know well that after that descent, there is no more to climb, and at the end of the tunnel there is always light, because without darkness that surrounds you, you can never identify the shining. Me. When I feel the anguish of nonsense, I will immerse myself in it, without the desire to find myself, with the desire to wake up. It is difficult to submerge, I know, like jumping into a lake of cold water. But in the stinging coldness, it is where I find the activation of my expansive inner heat, the pulse that is activated, the energy that is exalted. Anguish then ceases to be my prison to become my catapult toward love. I am. The starry sky you see above you, you owe to the dark night. In the same way, the brightness of your soul is visible by the darkness that lives in you, me. I am the void in fullness.
My heart